Welcome into Shot and Vipp, a podcast brought to you by Inside Carolina this college football season. I'm Taylor Vippolis. He's former Carolina linebacker Jeff Schoettmer. We are Carolina Letterman, breaking it down game by game. Before we get started today's shot, I have to remind everybody we've moved our website at Inside Carolina. We're all part of the new site on the On3 network. It's the same staff, the same standard, just a new home with On3. You'll need to create a new account and get a new subscription. Join now for just $1. It's a great deal. Go to InsideCarolina.com to learn more. Shot, man. We said that this game was going to be a good barometer to see how much this team has grown from that TCU debacle. We said this was going to be a great test to see the strides that this team made after they beat Charlotte and they beat Richmond. They go to Orlando to play UCF, and they get absolutely humiliated, 34-9 against UCF. Opening thoughts.
We got our ass bounced out of the bounce house. Like that was not on my bingo card for us to, not be remotely competitive in our first two Power Four games. Knowing in both of those games that the game's over in the third quarter. That's not what you expect. It's not what we signed up for. It's not what we paid $10 million a year for. And I know that sounds harsh, but when Mac Brown had a bad performance, we kept it real, and we got to do the same thing now. I'm not going to say, I don't believe anymore. Like, that's not me by any means. It's 4 games into the Belichick era, and, there's a lot of things that can happen going forward. But the surprising thing to me is, we aren't even competitive in these two games. And it's even if you don't know football at a very high level and you're watching our TCU game and you're watching our UCF game, like you can clearly see we are lacking, in all areas. The number one being, the offense first and foremost. We just make everything look so hard on offense. Even when we do, sustain some drives and get some momentum, the yards that we pick up, it doesn't look easy. And that's just the glaring thing to me. This team cannot play from behind. The way our offense is set up, it's not realistic. It's not possible. So it's important for us to get off to a fast start, and we definitely did not do that. We kind of can't get out of our own way. And this is not really what I expected to see from a Bill Belichick coach team. But a couple of glaring things to me are, take talent out of the equation. Okay. I don't see a super disciplined team. I don't see a team that executes in the critical moments. And I'm talking the gotta have it moments. I'm talking third downs on defense. I'm talking 4th and 1s. I'm talking red zone into the half. Offensively, situational football, the opening play of a series, 2-minute drives. I'm not just speaking on this game. I'm just speaking on the whole season. I don't really see a team that plays with their hair on fire. I don't see a team that plays with a lot of energy and passion. And I'm not talking about every player. I'm talking collectively as a whole, offense, defense, special teams. There's guys like Will Hardy, who I thought he played a tremendous game on Saturday. He's one of those guys that's, no matter what the score is, he is fighting his ass off. But, I don't see a lot of guys that are, they're just completely energetic on the field. A team that flies the football in all phases and covers up for each other's mistakes. Picking each other up when they're down, offense and defense. Hey, when we're down 13, I don't see the offense coming to the defense to cheer them up. Hey, let's go get a stop. We're back in this game. I kind of see a team whose will broke in both of those Power Four games against TCU and UCF, and that's not what I expected. So that's kind of my opening thoughts.
Yeah, my opening thoughts would be, I think after watching Carolina's 2 games against Power Four opponents where they get outscored 82-23 combined, this is just going to be a long year because you're watching this North Carolina team. They don't really have a roster that it looks like they can compete with. And I think, one, to be fair to Bill Belichick, you're going to have to give him some time to establish a roster that looks more like the roster that he wants to build. But also, North Carolina had a 2 transfer portal windows to try to bridge the gap with where this roster was at and where this roster had to go to field a competitive team. And admittedly, Michael Lombardi said, hey, that first transfer portal, which is the more important transfer portal when there's bigger names in there, that first transfer portal was just about, hey, can we fill out this roster? And what you're seeing on the field is a team that looks like they just try to fill out the roster to the best of their ability in that first transfer window and didn't really go out there with the intentions of getting difference makers. And you're watching this offense, and it's just not even a competitive offense out there. It starts at the quarterback position. The only Power 4 teams averaging less points per game against other Power 4 teams. So Carolina's averaging 11.5 points per game against Power 4 teams. UCLA, who they've already fired their coach. Florida, and Florida's 2 Power 4 games, they played LSU and Miami, 2 defenses that should project to be a lot better than TCU and UCF. Texas, their Power 4 game was against Ohio State, maybe the best team on paper in college football. And then Oklahoma State. And Oklahoma State, I don't know if you saw it this past weekend or on Friday night, they lost to Tulsa.
They lost to Swits.
Mike Gundy is a dead man walking there. And their only Power 4 game, they scored 3 points. So that's the company that North Carolina is in right now, where it's either like, hey, some teams have played great defenses, or the teams that are better sample size have already gotten rid of their coaches or looking to get rid of their coaches. And I don't think that's where North Carolina fans should be at after 4 games with Bill Belichick. But I think it is fair to question the entire process that this North Carolina staff has. And for those that do want to know, the buyout. So the buyout's a bit complicated, where if Belichick wants out, the buyout's $1 million for him to get out of the deal with North Carolina. For North Carolina to get out, his first 3 years, $30 million, fully guaranteed. So if Carolina, for some reason, did want to move on, it doesn't really look like that's feasible. So I think you are in a spot for this North Carolina team to be like, hey, let's try to build out this roster and see if we could do better come next transfer portal window. But Schott, that kind of leads perfectly into this offense and the biggest talking point from this game, the quarterback position. Like, it's only 4 games, and we wanted to see what Gio Lopez would look like in the next game against a Power 4 opponent. But at this point, it feels like it's a missed evaluation, thinking that he could make the jump up.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. I think in college football and NFL football, you can't solely look at the quarterback play. You have to marry the quarterback and the offensive coordinator and the scheme. You have to put all 3 of those in the same bucket. So it's number one, this is just my honest opinion. I do think the Gio Freddie experience, them 2 together, is over. I don't think, granted, there's going to be games the rest of the year where those 2 are probably the starter and the play caller, but I don't think going forward onto 2026, or for us to have success, that's the marriage. I've seen enough where they showed me through 4 games that they aren't a good fit for each other. One of the things that I wanted to talk about was kind of the offseason of the Carolina quarterback room. Okay, so we essentially cut Criswell at the beginning of the spring. And look, don't get me wrong, the coaches come in, new coach comes in, and he, this happens at every program across the country. They like guys that fit their system, and they don't like guys. And Criswell was obviously not one person that they deemed that he could be the starting quarterback at UNC. And they probably went to him and said, hey, you're not going to be the starter. You should probably transfer. And he did, because he obviously wants to start after starting last year. But the teams that have the most success in the NFL, and why I'm talking about the NFL, is because we said that we were going to be the 33rd NFL team. So if we're going to treat ourselves like an NFL team, I'm going to talk about the NFL. The teams in the NFL that are successful are the ones that, when they draft a player high, first or second round, and that player isn't what they thought he was going to be, they cut him. They don't wait for that player to get the staff fired. So I'm kind of using this analogy in terms of UNC. We took a chance on Gio Lopez. I don't know, how many years we're going to pay him, but we messed up that evaluation. Well, it's time to move on, in my opinion. I look at the Colts with Anthony Richardson. They drafted him very high. They gave him a chance. He wasn't the guy. They cut bait. They got Daniel Jones. Now they're 3-0. And the first 2 games of the year, they didn't punt. I don't know if a bunch of Carolina guys know, Indianapolis Colts football, but I'm a ball knower, so I'm watching all the leagues, right? So that's kind of the analogy. Like, we got to cut bait, admit we're wrong. You hit on some evaluations and you miss on some evaluations. So we got to realize when we messed up, cut bait, and go to the next guy. But I think we just panicked in signing a quarterback, right? We talked about all offseason about being strong in the middle. We're going to run the ball, et cetera. And we sign a 5'10", not very athletic kid, lefty out of South Alabama, who doesn't really fit the mold of the pro style offense of what we want to run. The other thing that I think is interesting, is not talked about enough, is the alignment of the general manager and the head coach or the coaching staffs, right? So in the NFL, I think a couple teams I can relate to, right? Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell, right? Brad Holmes is the GM of the Detroit Lions. Him and Dan Campbell are aligned at the hip. They have the same vision for a guy to fit Dan Campbell's team, his offensive approach, his defensive approach, and Brad knows exactly what he wants. You look at Eric DeCosta and Harbaugh in Baltimore. For years, they've been successful drafting guys because they fit, the Raven profile of who they want to draft. Sean McVay and Les Snead, another great example. Brandon Beane and McDermott in Buffalo. They are married at the hip in what they're evaluating to help their football team. And I think there's a disconnect right now, within 9 months of the job, of Lombardi, Belichick, and our offense and defensive scheme. Way more so on the offensive side of the ball, right? I don't think we retained Freddie Kitchens as OC, and I don't think he had a say in what quarterback he wanted to pick, right? I think that was a Lombardi decision, whoever it was, right? He's the GM, so he's either going to take the credit or the fall. But he signs a guy that Freddie Kitchens probably doesn't want to run his offense. So, that's where there's some disconnect. With our offensive coaches, they want to sign a guy that fits the mold of their scheme and what they think is going to be successful in their scheme. So I think we got to figure that out very quickly. Funny thing about this whole situation is I looked at the Purdue transfer, Ryan Brown, his stats through the first couple games.
I had that as a note.
First of all, he looked the part of a Bill Belichick pro style offense. 6'4", 6'5", 220, big guy, big arm, can see over the line of scrimmage. Didn't have tons of experience, but he's put up some good numbers through 4 games. Obviously, much better than Gio Lopez. So it's interesting to see that we just let him go and we sign a guy that doesn't really fit the mold of a pro style offense, what we were speaking to all offseason. So those are interesting nuggets there. But, in my opinion, I think this is the worst offense. I don't date back to the 90s and 80s and 70s of Carolina football history, but I know back to the mid 2000s of, I think this is the worst offense we've had since 2005, 2006 when John Bunning was the head coach. Some people could point to 2017, 2018 with Nathan Elliott and Chaz Surratt at quarterback. But I promise you the skill positions that we had in those years, you would take every single one of those guys over what we have right now. Michael Carter, Javonte Williams, Antonio Williams, De'Ami Brown, Daz Newsome, Austin Prohl, Ratliff Williams. Like, those 7 guys are better than anyone we have right now in our skill room. So, long-winded answer. There's a lot to unpack, and we can only talk about what we see on Saturday. There are a million things that go on in a college football program and that have gone on since the day that Bill Belichick's been hired. Am I out on Bill Belichick and this current staff? Absolutely not. But in my opinion, they need to, nip these mistakes in the bud right now and move on from it. Whether that's new OC, new quarterback, but what they're trotting out on the field right now is not working. So that's my kind of long-winded answer on all of that.
Yeah, comparatively, Ryan Brown's stats from Notre Dame, he was 21 of 34, 250 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception for a 70.3 QBR. Gio Lopez against UCF was 11 for 14, 87 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and a 15.5 QBR. He got hurt, so obviously, best wishes to him and hope he's doing well and recovers going into the bye week. I believe the last report I saw was that it wasn't believed to be season-ending injury from him. But I think where I'm at right now is I don't think Max Johnson is the answer at quarterback either for this North Carolina team. But at this point, I would rather the unknown of Max Johnson and wanting to see him in a game when it's 0-0 and not garbage time in the fourth quarter over what I feel like I know what I'm going to get with Gio Lopez after a 4-game sample size, and just him not feeling like he fits in this offense with what North Carolina is going to do. Like maybe Gio Lopez is a better quarterback and has a better skill set than somebody like Max Johnson. But what North Carolina is asking Gio Lopez to do, it's not working right now. And one interesting thing I think I've seen in college football throughout the season that has worked is teams are getting transfer portal quarterbacks, but they're also going and getting whatever success that quarterback had the past year, they're getting his offensive coordinator and pairing them together. When you're looking at Oklahoma, Ben Arbuckle comes over as the OC. John Mateer comes over as their new quarterback. They have a great win this past week against Auburn. Oklahoma looks like they could be a college football playoff contender. Last year, Vanderbilt gets Tim Beck and pairs him with Diego Pavia from New Mexico State. Michigan State has done something similar with Aiden Childs and their offensive coordinator from Oregon State. And this is the bad week to use it as an example.
Utah.
Yeah. Bad week to use it as an example because of how bad the offense looked for Utah in their top 25 matchup against Texas Tech. But overall, in theory, it does make sense. Like, hey, who did this quarterback have success with? Let's carry over and let's bring that system with us. So it's not him trying to learn a new system. Gio Lopez came over he missed spring ball too. So like this was always going to be a crash course learning for him. And it looks like a quarterback that didn't go through spring. And it looks like a quarterback that's making the steep jump up from the G4 or the G5 level to the Power 4 level. And it's just not translating right now for North Carolina. Would you, if you're this coaching staff, is Max Johnson the guy? What are the risks if you go to, one of these freshman quarterbacks, like if they're not ready and then you throw them into the deep water before you can kind of see if they could swim? Where are you at with where Carolina should be at with their quarterback position?
Yeah, I want to take everyone back to our podcast post TCU because Gio did not have a great opening performance. So we were like, look, we got 2 semi-cupcake games. He's got to play in those 2. And then obviously UCF to, try to right the train back on the track and, get some confidence and momentum. But things haven't played out well in the last 3 weeks. I think obviously his injury comes into effect, but you have to start Max Johnson. Max's garbage time versus UCF didn't look great, but he did complete some passes. He completed some passes, moved the ball a little bit versus TCU. But if I'm the offensive staff, I'm 100% starting Max Johnson. Again, we don't know the extent of Gio's injury, but I don't think you throw one of those true freshmen in right away. Bryce Baker or the kid from Virginia, they aren't ready to start against Clemson, regardless of how bad Clemson's looked. You got to start a guy with some experience, a guy that can get easy completions, a guy that can, see over the line, played in some big games, move the ball a little bit effectively. That's kind of my take on that. And then, about the offense in this game, the one thing that really stuck out to me was if you think back to the opening game, the first play of the season, we go under center. we're running, 6 offensive linemen, 2 tight ends, and we are running a quote unquote pro style under center offense. And we did, I don't know, 15 to 20 plays of that in the opening game. And it's kind of dwindled down in the last couple games. But in this game versus UCF, it was a modern spread offense. Granted, it wasn't very creative or very effective, but we've completely gone away from the under center stuff. So just, for us to transition our offense like that quickly is pretty alarming. But obviously the coaches feel that with Gio at quarterback, that's what they thought he could do best. So it's kind of interesting to see a scheme transition so quickly from one to the other through 4 games. After watching tape, there was, and Bill said this in his press conference, right? It's not just one guy. All 11 on offense have to, do their job to make the engine go. But the first interception, if you watch the replay, it's a basic RPO. Our right guard gets bullied and snatched, and the defensive tackle is in Gio's face in less than 2 seconds, 1.5 seconds. He is in his face with his paws up. Obviously, bats the ball down. Unlucky situation, but that's not all on Gio. That's on the offensive line getting their tail whipped very quickly into this snap. A third down early in the game, we're running a mesh concept versus man coverage, and everyone knows a mesh concept, you're supposed to rub the defender off, and we run into the defender and knock ourselves down essentially. So Gio doesn't have a target to hit and he gets sacked. It's just, we continually shoot ourselves in the foot. Second quarter, we finally get some momentum. We're driving the length of the field. Obviously it's, a long drive, and it's not chunk plays. There was one chunk play, but it's 2, it's 5, it's 7, it's a 30-yarder. And we get into the red zone, and it's just awful execution. We're an empty set, and we run a double screen, and we have Caleb Hood, who is acting as a wide receiver, getting the screen, and that obviously gets broken up and intercepted. That's on the scheme. That's not all Gio Lopez. That's on the scheme and us putting the wrong players in position or having the wrong call. You can't win games or be competitive in games when you turn the ball over in the red zone, when you can't move the ball at will. And then, just little stuff like that is what's so frustrating. And that's really all I'm going to say about it. There's not much to talk about on this offense other than, we've hit on this before, the lack of explosive players on offense.
Yeah.
Jordan Shipp had a few, Juju had a couple good runs, but outside of that, I don't know what receivers can stand out. Like flip sides to the ball on UCF, like they had playmakers all over the place, way more speed. They would just dunk the ball in the flat, and the receivers would block our safeties and corners, and they would gain 10, 12, 15 yards. We don't have any plays that we can create chunk plays easily. And I'm talking about throwing the ball behind the line of scrimmage, throw the ball short, and let our playmakers make plays. So that it does hamper the offensive coordinator's ability to call plays, and it does, put a negative connotation on the quarterback because he's got to produce high-level throws down the field when he can't just get rid of the ball quickly and have the skilled players make plays.
Yeah, I think the reason why you've seen such a drastic shift in scheme that this team is wanting to run, I think if you ask the coaches, they would prefer trying to do the under center stuff and playing more of like a bully ball style of offense. They don't have the personnel for that.
Yeah.
They don't have the personnel up front to, hand the ball off 40 times a game and try to grind out wins. So you've seen this more change into more of this modern offense. But again, they also don't really have the personnel for that, where it's like Jordan Shipp could be a playmaker. Chris Culver might have the talent to do it, but outside of those two guys at the receiver position, there's not much. Damon June, we've seen what he's done and his ability to take over at the running back room, and apparently this was a position group that the staff was pretty high on coming into the season. And coming into the season, there was very little talk from this staff about somebody like Damon June. It was the Caleb Hoods. It was the the Benjamin Halls. It was all these other guys at the running back position, to where it feels like Damon June kind of came out of nowhere. And I kind of do believe that's what happened for this North Carolina team. But Shot, when you were talking, I looked up plays over 20 yards in college football.
For the season?
For the season. There's 136 teams in college football. Any guesses where North Carolina ranks in terms of 20-plus yard plays?
Can I guess how many we have?
In 4 games, yes, you could guess.
6.
2 more. 8.
8? Okay.
8.
And we are ranked 136th, you said?
There's 136 FBS teams.
I mean, can't be 132? I don't know.
You hit the nail on the head. It's 132.
Jeez.
It's 132. So Carolina's 132nd in the country with 8 plays of over 20-plus yards. But the caveat there is they're tied with Northern Illinois. Northern Illinois has played 3 games. And then the 2 teams below them, Oklahoma State has 7. They've also only played in 3 games. And then Massachusetts has 5. They've only played in 3 games. So the company that North Carolina is in right now, it's Northern Illinois, Oklahoma State, UMass, and then the teams above them, Louisiana, Monroe, and Wisconsin. So that's, again, we talked about the teams that average less points per game against Power 4 teams. This is, again, you're seeing the class that North Carolina is in, where, you know, a team like Iowa, if you watch the Iowa-Rutgers game, if I just told you some of North Carolina's stats, you would just assume it was Iowa's offense. But even Iowa has addressed some of their offensive problems, getting a electric FCS quarterback in the portal. But let's take a quick break here so I can remind everybody about our friends over at Johnny T-Shirt. If you're going to be in Chapel Hill, you could visit Johnny T-Shirt on Franklin Street. And if not, no worries. You could go online to johnnytshirt.com. They have everything that the Carolina fan could possibly want. The hats, the T-shirts, the jerseys, you name it. They've got it. They're always running great sales over at Johnny T-Shirt, where you could get your Carolina apparel at the best price. It's great people, great customer service. And don't forget, Inside Carolina premium subscribers save 10% off their orders. Shot, I'm going to borrow a talking point from the TCU game when we're switching sides and we're talking about defense, because, again, I don't think this final score is necessarily fair to the defense, because I think at times they did look better. And in this game, if you're North Carolina, you're down 13-0 with 7 minutes left in the first half, and you have the ball in the red zone. And then Gio Lopez throws a pick, and then the game kind of spirals out of control there. But there were moments for the defense where, you know, Carolina finally gets a field goal before the first half ends, and there's like a minute, 30 seconds on the clock, and the defense unravels. They give up a touchdown so fast, and then they're coming out in the third quarter and the game's already over. So where are you kind of at with this defense after the UCF performance?
Yeah, again, I don't think they played as bad as the score says. But here's kind of my honest opinion through the first 4 games. I do believe we have some talented, well-coached players on defense. And I'm going to strictly speak about the 2 Power 4 games. So I'm going to speak about TCU and UCF. In the TCU game, for example, our linebackers played fairly well, and our secondary played atrocious. In this game, I thought our secondary, minus 1 or 2 plays, played pretty well, and our linebackers didn't play as well. So we haven't put together a complete game as a defense. You know, the D-line's been pretty consistent for the most part. No super splash plays, but, you know, holding their own essentially. So I think we just haven't put a full game together from our top, 12 to 14 players on defense. Let's start with the first drive. What the big issue in that drive was we couldn't get off the field on 3rd and long. They completed, 2 3rd and 7 pluses. They converted a 4th down. So in those key situations where you got to have it, you got to find a way to get a stop, whether it's a great executed, third down pressure, sticky man coverage, someone making a play. We just couldn't get it done. And then, obviously they have a zone read to score the first touchdown, right? An athletic quarterback run game in the red zone is always, ramped up, and we weren't ready for that. The thing that I really liked about our defense was after the second drive, we throw an interception, right? And it's in UCF territory, or in our defensive territory. So UCF gets the ball, sudden change, after we just went on a 14-play drive on defense of, okay, we got to stop them now. If they score 2 touchdowns in their first 2 possessions, 5 minutes into the game, all hell could break loose. And we bowed up and did hold them to a field goal there, which was, exciting to see. Anytime there's a sudden change, that's the defense's goal, especially when the ball's in the red zone, is just hold them to a field goal, right? If they don't gain it down, they're still going to kick a 35-yarder. So we held our own there and kept them out of the end zone. But what really hurt us in the first half was we couldn't get off the field 3rd and 4th downs. The QB run game did hurt us. They'd had 2 athletic quarterbacks that they rotated in at quarterback that both can really run, way more athletic than what we have at quarterback. The other thing I noticed was, the quick now screens and the swing screens, they blocked us well in the perimeter. They fit us up 1-for-1, and they had a running back that could outrun our linebackers and safeties that were pursuing the football. And then ultimately the drive before the half, that was a absolute backbreaker. At one point in the game on that drive, the announcer, who I thought was pretty good, the color commentary guy, he was like, UCF should just go into half. They look a little flustered. They look out of sorts. And then what we did was played a prevent defense, a zone coverage look, a mix of Tampa 2 and just spot drop cover 3, and didn't really pressure anybody. We just kind of let them mosey down the field, hit a 10-yarder, hit a 12-yarder, get a personal foul call, and now we look up and the ball is at the 40-yard line. And, I was very frustrated with our soft zone coverage for them, and then allowing them to just easily dink and dunk the ball down the field. Obviously I'm not the D coordinator, but what do you have to lose there in terms of pressuring the guys? So look, you gave up a touchdown anyway. Might as well pressure them, get them in their face. Our cornerbacks and safeties were covering pretty well early on. I thought Marcus Allen played better. I thought Caleb Koss played better. Will Hardy played a hell of a game. Gibson's been a steady player for us. So why not? You have these starters for a reason at the defensive back position. Challenge them, get in their face, and make them earn it down the field. And we didn't do that. And then obviously they score on a busted coverage, the screen and go, where Gibson and Dixon had a miscommunication. I think it was on Gibson. It was just straight man coverage, and he kind of fell off and went with the screen instead of the and go guy. But that play and that drive kind of broke the will of our team. And we aren't, in my opinion, aren't a very mentally tough team, because you get that score and then we just look deflated. And, you go into the half 13-3 with us getting the ball back. I think it's a completely different game. Instead, it's 20-3, and it's a completely different ball game. So I think there is pressure on our defense to be more perfect and execute, because they know their offense can't score, and that's not a good feeling.
Yeah, and I'm not too sure on, if UCF's quarterback is like this next great Big 12 quarterback, Taven Jackson, but you do have to give credit to this UCF team. They understood what his skill sets were going into this game, and this goes back to the offensive conversation that we've had, where it's like UCF very clearly understood where this kid's strengths were, the read options, getting the ball out quick, almost making the decisions for him in terms of what to do with him in the offense. And it felt like they were fitting a square peg into a square hole, whereas the North Carolina offense feels like fitting a square peg into a round hole and trying to make something work. But I'm glad you mentioned Will Hardy, because I did want to mention that Will Hardy had the highest grade on the Pro Football Focus grades with a 73.1. He had 8 tackles, 0 missed tackles, and 87.1 tackling grade, which was the highest on the team. And if you want to do the glass half full, Carolina did miss a single digit amount of tackles with 9 missed tackles in this game against UCF. But Shot, going forward for this North Carolina team, they're on a bye week. They have Clemson next. One of the talks with this team was the schedule played out in their favor, getting some teams at the bottom of the ACC. It was a weak schedule for them to kind of capitalize on maybe where this team's ceiling and maybe this team's floor could be. At this point, every team on North Carolina's schedule is looking at them saying, this is one of the easiest games we have left, unless you're playing, a Stanford or a team like that. But next 4 games up, Clemson, at Cal. Cal had a pretty bad loss this weekend, but you're going to Berkeley, then Virginia, at Syracuse. How are you approaching this team if you're on the team and maybe as a fan as Carolina goes into this bye week?
Well, I'll say this as a former coach, there's nothing worse than going into the bye week with a loss, and especially not a pretty loss. There's some games you lose and it's maybe an overtime game and it's back and forth, and we put out a great effort, but we ultimately lost the game. We got holes everywhere on our team. We lose by a lot on the road. Now we're going into a bye, and that's not a good feeling. And our starting quarterback gets hurt. So, that's 3 negatives right there. Obviously, it is a time for us to reset a little bit, reevaluate, do a lot of self-scout this next week, because you do get some extra time to, work on yourself before you work on your opponent. Obviously, you're going to be the coaches are going to be doing both at the same time, but we get to look at our glaring issues and what do we have to fix right away to be competitive going forward. I'm not even saying win the game, but just be competitive, right? So that's kind of what this next 2 weeks will entail, but we're not in a good situation by any means. Clemson's obviously motivated coming off of an ugly Syracuse loss, obviously lost to Georgia Tech before that. They're not going to come out and lay an egg against us, surely. I'd rather play Clemson if they were 4-0 right now. Dabo's you see how frustrated Dabo is with the media right now.
They're backing Dabo into a corner right now, and he's got the claws out ready to fight.
Yeah, I would rather play them 4-0 right now. But and then obviously you look at Virginia. I haven't watched much of them, and Syracuse obviously beats Clemson on the road, and their coach has a bunch of fire. And I think obviously their quarterback got hurt and he's out for the year, but it's not a situation I think we expected to be in, but we're dealt these cards. We dealt our own cards, honestly, and now we gotta right the ship in some capacity. We gotta hang our hat on something offensively, just lean into that. The other thing I want to say is, in the first podcast of the year, we asked what would a successful season for the 25 North Carolina football team be. And we said, we threw out some numbers of wins and et cetera. But our big thing was we want to see our team get better as the season, progresses. We want to see players get better. We want to see our scheme get better. We want to see tackling get better. We want to see, our blocking get better. All these individual skills, we want to see them progress, because going into the season, we really didn't know what we had. I don't think anyone did. So that's what I want to see. I want to see progress. I want to see tighter games. I want to see better execution in all situations. Defensively, I do think we will play our best football going forward. I do think we have some stuff to clean up, but I'm way higher on our defense than our offense, obviously. So offense has their work cut out for them in terms of, obviously who's at quarterback, but what scheme are we going to run? What skill position players are we going to try out there? How do we at least possess the ball long enough to give our defense a break, put some type of points on the board? Special teams, their challenge is, how do we score on the special teams side of the ball? Kickoff return, punt return, et cetera. How do we make an impact to help, our offense out, because they can't do it by themselves? And, all 3 phases got to work together to muddy up the game, to make it ugly and keep it tight. Because, right now we have a clear disadvantage on one side of the ball. The other side of the ball is just, consistent. I'm talking about special teams. They aren't making huge plays. They aren't making blunders. They're just kind of there. They're doing their job. But defensively, I think we're pressing a little bit, and we're like, hey, we got to go make a play because we got to get the ball back because we got to score on our own because our offense can't do it. So, it goes back to playing, complementary football, and that's what you've always seen from Bill Belichick's team. So hopefully we can find a way to tap into that and have a positive, back third of the year.
Yeah, Carolina on their bye week this week, the early line for Clemson at North Carolina. Any guesses?
So the Syracuse game versus Clemson was like 17.
17 and a half.
And that's what ours is?
No.
Okay, 7. Is it 20 and a half?
But less than that.
17?
13 and a half, Clemson.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's surprising.
Yeah, it's surprising. I think they're giving a lot of credit to the home field advantage, and Clemson isn't a team that a lot of people are buying right now. But I think if people have watched North Carolina, if people aren't buying Clemson, they're really not buying what North Carolina has put out. But Carolina on a bye week, they'll be back October 4th, noon kickoff in Chapel Hill from Kenan Stadium on ESPN against Clemson. Glass half full, Clemson is 0-2 in conference play. Carolina yet to play a conference game this season. So if they could win this one and start conference play with a win, it would be massive for the Tar Heels. But Schott, we will be back after that game to break it all down. Appreciate everybody watching and listening. And Schott, man, appreciate the time as always.
Yeah, absolutely. I got 2 final points.
Okay.
I'm still ready to go. I'm not ready to turn this podcast off. Number 1, I was the ultimate Bill Belichick hype man when he came to North Carolina. And by no means am I out on Bill Belichick as having a successful stint as our head coach. I kind of, with Lombardi's comments about the offseason transfer portal, that honestly, I'm going to spin it in a positive way in terms of that Bill thinks he's here for the long haul. So he's taking the slow route of building this roster and this team back up. He's going to do it brick by brick, day by day, and really, put his heart and soul in it. And he's in it for the long haul. So maybe that's the way I'm going to spin it in terms of it's not going to be an overnight fix. It's going to take time. It's going to take months. It's going to take hopefully not years, but it's going to take time to build it back up. So, we can't forget he is the greatest head coach of all time in the NFL football. Obviously, that doesn't translate to college all the time, but I still have faith that he'll right the ship. Do I still think we're going to win a national championship with him as the head coach? I don't know. Maybe I got to temper those expectations, but we got a lot to fix in the meantime. And the other thing is Ludacris is playing a 10 a.m. concert on Chapel Hill's campus. I don't know if he signed up for that. I don't know if Ludacris has ever done a 10 a.m. concert in his life. So I think that's the other funny nugget about what's going on in today's world. So funny stuff.
Wow, I didn't even realize it was a 10 a.m. concert. That's
because it's a noon kick. So
yeah, that's you wake up, you get some Suttons, and you stroll on over and
you go see
watch
Ludacris.
Luda.
Because our fan base fits the Ludacris demographic for sure.
When I close my eyes and I think the Carolina fan, I do say Ludacris.
Ludacris, baby.